Americans evacuated from the cruise ship at the center of a deadly Hantavirus outbreak touched down in Omaha, Nebraska early Monday, home to a specialized quarantine unit.
Over the next several days, passengers will undergo an initial health assessment and receive guidance on next steps from the CDC experts and other partners.
Officials said 16 passengers remained at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, one in a biocontainment unit for care, the other 15 in quarantine for monitoring.
Everyone here is asymptomatic and afebrile and do not have a temperature at this time.
2 others are in a biocontainment unit at Atlanta's Emory University, with one experiencing symptoms. Passengers who remain asymptomatic will be given an option to complete a 42-day monitoring period at home or in the medical facilities. Health officials emphasize this is a variant that does not spread easily.
Let me be crystal clear. The risk of hantavirus to the general public remains very, very low.
But stops short of a guarantee it won't spread to the general public.
There are no guarantees in life. We're putting as many measures in place as possible to ensure that people are safe and healthy, and we keep the community safe and healthy as well.
Meanwhile, in a message posted by the cruise ship's operator Monday, the ship's captain thanked the crew, passengers, and others for their support.
What moved me the most was your patience, your discipline, and also kindness that you show to each other.
At least 3 people have died from the current outbreak, according to the World Health Organization. In Washington, I'm Karen Kefa.
Video shows the moment parents released from an Arizona Department of Homeland Security facility reunited with their teen son, dying of cancer. The 18-year-old U.S. citizen fell ill in December while visiting Chicago and was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Meanwhile, his parents, both Mexican nationals, had previously been deported from the U.S. after entering illegally. But desperate to visit their dying son, they re-entered the U.S. in April, this time applying for temporary non-immigrant visas. However, the couple was denied, detained, and ultimately deported back to Mexico once again on Friday, according to DHS. In a last-minute bid to reunite, their son flew to Durango, Mexico a week ago, where he has discontinued treatment. In the days leading up to his parents' release, he had this to say.
Me siento emocionado, alegre, y ahorita con un poco de sueño, pero todo bien. A todo el mundo por su ayuda. No pensé que fuera a llegar tan grande. Solo quería darles las gracias.
Esto nunca ha salido de bodegas.
For decades, these items were kept in the dark. Now, for the first time, they are being brought back into the light. Mexican collector Francisco Javier Lopez delves into his archive. His collection of more than 2,000 pieces started more than 5 decades ago with a single sticker album from the 1974 World Cup.
A true collector should not just accumulate. You have to become a historian and rescue the narrative behind each piece.
And the stories here span generations. From pennants of the 1962 World Cup in Chile to bottle caps featuring players from Mexico's first domestic World Cup in 1970, to official gear worn by sports journalists in Argentina in 1978.
This vest is certified. Photographers had to wear it to access the field. It even has the registration number.
And through it all, one thing has never changed.
What does a collector need?
You can never lose your sense of wonder. If you do, your collection becomes mere material.
He's also preserved tickets from matches played during Mexico's 2 previous World Cups, in 1970 and 86.
This was the game of the century, Germany versus Italy. They gave everything.
Now, as Mexico prepares to co-host this year's World Cup, his collection is approaching its final chapter.
What's the future of this collection?
In life, you have to learn how to close cycles. This is a perfect one. It begins with Mexico 1970 and can end with dignity in Mexico 2026.
His archive will be put on public display for the first time this summer in Mexico City. A lifetime of football preserved one piece at a time. Valeria Leon, CNN, Mexico City.
A public demonstration and we can't get in. These Venezuelans are calling on their government to raise wages and ease repression. The police keep turning folks back.
Entonces, ¿cómo podemos entrar? And he's trying to tell us that there's another side to go to. We've driven all the way around this area for about 30 minutes and we haven't found a way to enter. It looks like now we might have found one possible entry here, but I mean, it's now towards the end of the march and demonstration. She's saying elections have to come for a radical change. He says they took, meaning the U.S., Maduro, but left the rest of the system in place.
Delcy as an acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, who governs behind layers of security. Several blocks of armed guards.
Even got a mobile command force right there.
Not surprising given how her predecessor's rule ended on January 3rd, when U.S. forces captured Nicolás Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores. Their names and faces now plastered across Caracas. Billboards, graffiti, homemade signs. The government, at least, wants them back.
The reality is Maduro, the man who ran this country for some 13 years, even though his face is everywhere here in Caracas, well, he's in custody, locked up in the U.S. The system he built, that is still standing, and that's not lost on the people here.
Especially the families of the more than 450 political prisoners still in custody.
We've driven about an hour outside the capital. We're headed to El Rodeo, which is considered to be one of the better known prisons where many of these political prisoners are believed to be held.
At the prison gate, family members live out of tents, waiting for weekly visits.
And because they don't have the money to make the trip multiple times, they camp out. And on days like today, they have visits with their loved ones.
Though the repression has not totally lifted, it has loosened a lot.
It's also worth noting that not everyone feels like the United States should be involved in Venezuelan matters.
Presidente Trump para nosotros está loco.
You think he's crazy?
Crazy.
At a pro-government rally, we had folks coming up to us to say Venezuela is not a colony, that sovereignty here matters to them.
But for most here, the deepest suffering is economic. The official minimum income just went up to $240 a month. Most Venezuelans earn far less, and food alone costs nearly 3 times that amount. There is a small bubble of wealth, nice cars, weekend clubs, but most here live like Maria Perez's family. Inside her parents' home, the scarcity is hard to miss.
Nada.
This is your dad, tu padre?
Mi padre.
No? Yeah. She said her dad is a diabetic, her mom's got severe arthritis. When it comes to healthcare, it's really bad.
Sí.
Her home is a 20-minute walk uphill from her parents. No real roads to get there.
Estos hacen tanque. Hay que
Well, they
llenar.
only really have running water, she said, every 45 days. And so, sorry, I'm out of breath a little bit, but the remainder of the days, they rely on these big tanks.
Venezuela's leaders acknowledge how dire the economic situation is, and they often blame U.S. sanctions, though the Trump administration points to years of corruption, mismanagement, and authoritarian rule as the cause.
Most everyone that we spoke with over the past few days has given us some version of the same sentiment, and that is that they're grateful that the U.S. captured Maduro, they're glad that he's gone, but as to what happens next, when you ask them that question, they stress that is for Venezuelans to decide, though they also emphasize they need the rest of the world to keep on watching.